Welcome to a special edition of Hard Talk with me, Stephen Sacker. Today, the BBC is running a series of programmes about democracy, the idea and the reality. Now, it's a theme my guest today has had reason to consider in great depth. Wu'er Kaixi was one of the leaders of the Tiananmen Square student protests in Beijing in 1989. He became one of the Chinese government's most wanted men. He escaped, and he now lives in exile in Taiwan. And today, he joins me and a Hard Talk audience here in London. Wu'er Kaixi, welcome to Hard Talk.
Thank you very much. We could use more platform like this to voice our idea.
Well, I want to talk to you all about your ideas, and I want to begin by taking you back to 1989. You made a stand as a student leader for freedom and for democracy. And looking back at it now, it has cost you your life as you knew it then in 1989. On a personal level, do you have any regrets?
Well, I survived in a great movement that I'm proud to be part of it, but it ended up as a massacre. Regret can be sometimes understatement. I don't think I have done anything wrong, and then actually very proud to be part of that historical event. But if you ask me the question the other way, if you ask me, do I want to do it again, the answer will be very hesitant because of the outcome, the result is nothing we have anticipated.
Yeah, that's sort of what I was driving at. I mean, if you'd had a crystal ball and if you could have seen into the future and what would have happened both to yourself and to your country post-89, would you have made the decision to go on hunger strike, to be one of the leaders going onto stages and demanding of the ruling party that they change, that they deliver a democratic vision? Or would you have, if you'd seen into the future, thought, no, it's not worth it?
Well, the logic of all mass movement throughout the history has always been like when people have a dissatisfaction, they come together, they express their voice, they try to apply pressure to the opponent, to the government, to the ruling party, and then hoping for that they can make a better, they can take the better option, knowing there could always be some worse options that they take, and then in China that has often been the case. But how bad it can be, we did not anticipate fulmination, massacre, bringing tanks, hundreds of thousands of troops, sieging under siege, the whole Beijing city under siege. And then on my personal account, I mean, yes, we paid a great price. I have not been able to see my parents, my family for the last 25, 26 years. It's a great price to pay, but my price doesn't even compare with those who lost their life and in that night, and hundreds of, if not thousands of them.
Well, let's go back to those days of May and June 89, and then we'll look forward to where China is today and where it's going. But if we go to 89, here's an interesting thought that I had. You were using this word democracy at the time, and yet you were a child of a one-party state. You know, you've been brought up in the country created by Chairman Mao.
Yes.
How on earth did you know what democracy was?
Well, first of all, Communist Party never really denied the term of democracy. And then, in fact, the word democracy in Chinese is 民主, and transliteration back into English is people rule. So, hey, that's a great idea, people rule. And then Communist Party keeps saying, this is democracy.
And didn't Mao call it the people's democratic dictatorship?
That's what he called it, yes. And then we had to be totally honest, yes, we do not know much about democracy other than the face value of the term, other than some glimpse that we had in the last 10 years, before 1989, the 10 years we look at the West. What the real driving force that brought us to the street in Beijing in 1989 was not so much our knowledge, deep knowledge of democracy. It's our deep knowledge of lack of democracy. We know what it is than when we don't have democracy.
But you were from a relatively privileged background. I mean, you were a guy who had the chance of a higher education in a Beijing university. You were...
Beijing normal.
Yeah, exactly. So you know, in a way, I'm surprised that you were prepared to risk everything back in '89, because there must have been a lot of fear. You knew the party was not going to easily accept what you were saying.
Again, we wanted to apply pressure, so hopefully that they can make, they can take the better option. Yes, we were privileged. All university students in China in 1989 will be somehow considered privileged because the college examination entrance rate is insanely low. It's something like, 1%. And then those of us who made it, we are almost guaranteed a position in the society, but guaranteed by somebody else, never by ourselves. We did not want our life to be managed, to be handled, to be designed by someone else. After Deng Xiaoping came to power in 1979, 10 years, he introduced the idea of reform and openness. He didn't really open China in 1989. He didn't open the door of China in 1989. He opened the window, and then just a glimpse of it. But see through that, we saw an idea of controlling one's life by himself, by herself. And then that is very attractive. And then that's something we don't have.
So that attraction overcame your fear?
I would say so, yes. That attraction is actually simply called hope. That is something would overcome anything.
Let me ask you a very specific thing. And the Chinese nation, I think, will always associate you with one particular moment. You and a few other student leaders were invited to the Great Hall of the People for a televised meeting with one of the party chiefs of the time, Li Peng. It was supposed to be a sign that the party hierarchy was listening. But when you got there, you didn't just sort of obediently accept and pay respects to Li Peng. You interrupted him. You said, "Sir, with all due respect, this meeting has come a month too late." And you said, "We should be setting the agenda, not you." That was extraordinarily confrontational.
It was the 30th, 40th day of the student movement. Yes, we were on hunger strike. Of course, it's confrontational. And then with all due respect, I think we invited them for that occasion. You said they invited us over. No, that's not what we had in mind. We asked for Li Peng to come out to have dialogue. That has always been the key word of 1989. We wanted that dialogue. Eventually, we were asked to go to a place to sit with them, so we thought maybe this is the dialogue. But no, it wasn't a dialogue, it's a monologue, it's a lecturing. It's condescending, it's showing a message to the Chinese people that we students went too far. And the elderlies, the hierarchies, they are giving us some talk, some lecturing, like some lessons. But then that cannot be televised to the Chinese people because that will be a wrong message. What happened really is after 20, 30, 40 days, we did apply the pressure. Something is happening. And then this happened. And then this cannot be interpreted into something else.
Do you think it made any difference? That image of you sort of treating Li Peng as an equal, not as some superior being from the top of the party, but as an equal. Do you think, whatever happened after June 4th, '89 in China, that image and that moment still matters?
In two aspects. Number one, did it made an influence for the decision Communist Party made, like when we're talking about massacre?
About the tanks moving in?
Yes, I don't think so. The meeting, the set for that occasion was basically part of the whole plan. Before that day, they had no plan. They didn't know how to deal with this. They did not know when the troops of world journalists coming to China to cover the summit between China and Soviet walk into a revolution, and then they broadcast the image to the world, and then the pressure is enormous. And then the whole society stood up to support the students. They had no anticipation of this. So they had no movement until that day. When that happened, when Li Peng agreed to meet with us, the whole plan, the decision was made already. That's how communists operate.
And you have used this word massacre.
Of course.
It's a word which, of course, the Chinese government refuses to accept. But I want you to tell me what you, even 25 years on, recollect of your feelings when you realized that it was happening? The tanks were rolling into Tiananmen Square, the live ammunition was being used, and that hundreds, some say thousands, of your peers, students, protesters, some onlookers as well, were being killed.
The term massacre, of course, have been attached to who I am in the last 20-some years. So there were a few occasions I look into the dictionary on this word. Excuse me. It is like killing indiscriminately. Every dictionary you open, you'll find the same answer for that. And then that is what it is. Troops roll in. They have agenda. They need to clear Tiananmen Square. Whoever on their way, they were given green lights to use real ammunition, and they did.
Did you escape early, or were you?
I was in the square. The Tiananmen Square itself was not really the killing field.
It was the avenues leading into the square.
Yes. And then when the troops come to Tiananmen Square, Liu Xiaobo negotiated a term with the troops to avoid massacre at the square. So, you know, for him to get in the Nobel Peace Prize, this is definitely one of the most important conditions, I believe.
Did you try to speak to any of the soldiers yourself?
No. I was earlier. I went to one of the front line on the east side, trying to see what's happening there. But it was way too chaotic. There's no way to speak to anybody at that time. And then the shooting has already began. I've seen people shot down, and then the voice of bullets traveling in the air is something that I can still remember vividly. And then the people's blood, the smell of the people's blood also. That is a bona fide massacre, sir.
Did you believe you would get out alive?
No, I did not believe, yes. After the massacre, there were rumors. After the June 4th day, we were hiding in cities. And then for me, the idea is to turn myself in. But then there were rumors in Beijing to say, okay, the Wang Dan, #1 most wanted, they want him alive. That is the order given to the soldiers and police. And Wu'er Kaixi, dead. They don't want me alive. They don't want to apprehend me. That's the rumor, of course. There's no way to verify that, but that sounds like Communist Party. So I don't even see a chance to turn myself in. So I decided to leave Beijing city. Maybe outside of Beijing, I can manage to be arrested by police instead of soldiers. And then maybe by doing that, I can maintain some dignity in a personal level.
Well, you escaped. And you eventually made it to the West and eventually to Taiwan, and we're going to pick up your story back in Taiwan. But now I want to reflect a little bit on the meaning of '89 and Tiananmen for today's China. Yes. Because today's leaders in China still believe that the chaos, what they see as the chaos and the sort of mob rule in Beijing in June of '89 is one of the best justifications for them maintaining their one-party rule on the country today, because they are the guarantors of stability and security for the great mass of the Chinese people. And they say nobody wants to go back to the crazy, awful days of Tiananmen. What is your response to that?
Didn't we hear that from time to time from different dictators around the world? They have to remain in power to provide safety and stability. They are the source of China's chaos. Not only in Tiananmen, not only in 1989, but in the last 60-some years.
But does not the pattern of events that we've seen, for example, in the Middle East since 2011, support their case? Their case being that in the end you need a strong central government that is capable of imposing its will on the country to deliver security. Because when you lose that, and you could point to Egypt, you could point to Syria or to Yemen or a host of other Arab countries after the popular uprisings, when you lose that, you introduce chaos and then ethnic tensions and then internal violence on a scale that in China could only be imagined.
Yet, 750 years ago, you decided to adopt democracy. I am quite sure in the early days of the beginning era of democracy, it was quite chaotic in this country too. and then you manage to prevail. Democracy prevailed here in the last 750 years, and give them time. The Arab world, they need time, they need support, and then they need patting on the shoulder and says, you're doing good, you're doing better than yesterday, but not to accuse like the price they had to pay for democratization. And then that is errors.
But I suppose the argument would be that far from paying a price over the last almost 30 years, the Chinese people have reaped the reward of stability. We've seen the most extraordinary improvement in material living standards known in human history. 600 million people and more lifted out of poverty by the one-party communist rule inside China. And today's president in China, Xi Jinping, he says this, he says, China cannot copy the political system or development model of other countries. It would not fit us. It would lead to catastrophic consequences. His message, with us, you get prosperity.
In the early 20th, 30th of last century, Hitler was saying just about the same thing. With the centralized Nazi ruling the Germany after the war, the first war, now we come together, gain the power, we provided people with more jobs, stabilities, poverties. I mean, we get rid of poverties, and then now the world need to give in to what we want.
But you're not seriously, are you seriously comparing today's Chinese government with the Nazis in the 1930s?
No, I'm not. I'm comparing the British. I'm comparing the British in the 1920s with British people today in the world. And then that's called appeasement. We had democracy in the last 800 years, always had enemies. The enemies come in different form, different shape, from different ideas. Some Nazi communists, they were fighting against each other, but they are both the enemy of democracy. And then when we're facing the enemy of democracy, sometimes we make major mistakes. And then this country remembers that mistake vividly. But I'm seeing it forgetting now.
I guess it depends what you think democracy is for. Kishore Mahbubani, who's quite an influential diplomat, he was an ambassador in Singapore, he's written lots of books about what he calls the particular Asian model of development. He says, you know, in the West, we are far too hung up on the process and the mechanism of democracy. What he says really matters is delivery. And if you have a system of government that effectively delivers for the people, then it doesn't need to be democratic in the Western individualistic sense, because it is delivering for the mass of the people. And you have to say that on those terms, the Chinese government is delivering for its people.
You're using the word of the Singaporean ambassador that made you escape one of my remarks. If you are saying that is the understanding of the Western democracy world, that delivering is most important, I would definitely go back again to the 20th and 30th, to Hitler, and maybe not Hitler. Every time when I say Hitler, I see people like, no, you cannot say that. How about Mussolini? How about Mussolini? So, okay, let's use Mussolini. He's not as bad, not as evil. But he was at the same time providing. And then he is called the one leader who is like almost a modern time Caesar, who brought, and then Italian people still remember him as the one who makes the train go on time. I was in Italy recently, and then when they asked me, do we need to learn from China today? Because Italy is in trouble today, we know, economically. And then I say, well, you learn from China. Why don't you learn from Mussolini? You have your own model. But then they understood.
But hang on, here's a thought. Maybe you are exaggerating the repression in China. Well, let me discuss this with you. In China today, you see protest movements. If you read the internet, you see that people have the space to criticize local officials. You see that Xi Jinping and his senior colleagues have responded to the frustration with corruption in China by launching a massive anti-corruption drive with people like Bo Xilai and other senior officials being brought down because, partly, the public is demanding a cleaner government. So something is happening in China.
Something is always happening in that massive country. Let's say, excuse me, but when the Western world think of the term corruption, the idea comes to your mind because you have corruption in democracies too. That's bribery, that is money exchange of profit from the government. That's your understanding of corruption. it is like nothing compared with the corruption happening in China. And let me tell you, Xi Jinping has the least interest of getting rid of that, what I call systemic corruption. The government is corruption. You know, China, before the open and reform, it was so-called a socialist country. How did they become a socialist country? They looted the former KMT's ruling Republic of China, get all the capitalist property into the government, and then when Deng Xiaoping introduced the term reform, and then they privatize it, who get benefit from that? The Communist Party ruling group. That is the corruption. Will Xi Jinping get rid of that? He cannot. He's getting rid of a couple of overly done corruptions.
In recent months, we've seen protests in Hong Kong. Thousands of people on the streets. They called it their umbrella revolution, but it didn't really get anywhere. Look into
it's an ongoing movement, sir.
Let's look into the future then.
Yeah.
What do you see happening now in China in terms of developing a mass demand for real political reform?
Well, Communist Party, they just don't know how to face, they are not used to facing people's demand. They don't know how to do that. They don't want to do it. And then come to think about it, I can almost understand them. We wanted dialogue in 1989, and then the dialogue has been the central phrase in the last 20-some years. Tibetans want dialogue, Uyghurs want dialogue, and then this time Hong Kong students want dialogue. They even decide to purchase their own air ticket, fly to Beijing to have that dialogue. And Chinese government said, no, no dialogue.
And you have actually personally tried to return to your homeland,
yes.
I know several times.
4 times,
And
yes.
in a sense, you've said, arrest me.
Yes.
But then take me back to my homeland, partly because then maybe I can see my parents.
And then I can continue that dialogue in the courtroom of China, even in the form of indictment and plea. Yeah, I want to have that dialogue.
Are you serious about that?
Very much.
Despite a comfortable life in Taiwan and believing that Taiwan is a working democracy, you would rather go back to your homeland, to China,
yes.
to face a court and make your case for democracy?
And then I can at least see my parents, even if it is in the form of prison visit. And to fulfill and to continue the unfinished business we started 25 years ago. I remember one of the netizens, one of our respected teachers, we would call back in 1989, who were in the street and supporting us. And nowadays he's a known citizen, dissident in China. She says, in nowadays today, if you are not in prison, there's something morally wrong there. And then I'm moved.
We're out of time, but one word. Can there be democracy in China in your lifetime?
Absolutely. I have to be optimistic. Before I come to show today, I watched one of the early BBC shows of interviewing Mahatma Gandhi, and he was optimistic even back then.
We have to end there, but Wu'er Kaixi, thank you for being on HARDtalk.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.